All right, we now welcome a pair of very special guests. We are beginning the division preview portion of the offseason, and we're very happy to be joined by Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley of Locked On Red Wings. And this is the perfect way to begin the division series because these two teams are compared and contrasted more than I think any other two in the entire National Hockey League. But first, let's introduce the fellas. We'll start with you, Brian. How are you, sir?
Doing great. I'm really excited to do this crossover because, like you said, this is the two teams in this division that are probably compared to each other the most, and they're pretty much lockstep in their rebuilds in every facet. I mean, down to the salary cap, they're fifth and sixth in the most cap space available, separated by like $50,000. It's incredible how close these two teams are in terms of the rebuild. So I'm really excited to get into that and talk about, why the Red Wings are going to be better. But we'll get there when we get there.
Okay, we'll get there. I guess for the Detroit Red Wings fans and listeners, we'll introduce Pilsy as well. Say what up for the listeners so they can hear your beautiful voice.
Hey guys, yeah, definitely excited to do this crossover because there's going to be some contentious games. I seem to remember Ottawa kind of getting the best of Detroit at the end of the season.
I lost my hat.
We'll see. Yeah. The hats are off for the Sens fans when they were in Detroit, that's for sure. But it's a whole new season, so we're excited to chat with you guys about it.
100%. I needed a bit of a rebuttal after Brian's little shot there. Scotty, how are you, buddy? We've chatted before. Obviously, you've been a longtime host, Locked On Red Wings, Locked On Tigers. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, man. It's good to be back. Yeah, the definitely, a lot of people, especially in the second half last year, got the better of the Detroit Red Wings.
Yes.
So, I think hopefully this is a new year with new opportunities. But yeah, I'd say we had like this stretch where I want to say in a month period, we gave up like 3 or 4 hat tricks. All the people who had never had hat tricks before, something ridiculous. It was really impressive. So new year though, new year, new team.
Impressive is a word you could describe it. I'd say a little bit more embarrassing, but yeah,
I'd say impressive.
What was impressive was the start that the Red Wings had. I mean, 4-2-1, sure, sample size is kind of at play there too, but still 7 wins in their first 12 games of the season. Did you see the cliff, or after that 5-game win streak in early December, did it just kind of take everyone by surprise?
I mean, we always knew what the team's problems were, and the chief problem was defense. They had no defensive depth outside of Moritz Seider. I mean, Moritz Seider came in, immediately played the most minutes at 20 years old when he came in, played the most minutes on the team, played on every special team, and was the number one defenseman and was expected to be the number one defenseman from the moment he entered the National Hockey League. Now, he was phenomenal, won the Calder Trophy, but that's incredibly unfair expectations to put on a 20-year-old coming into the league. He owned it, but he was the only defenseman on that roster capable of it. I mean, you were pairing him with Danny DeKeyser, who, God bless his soul, I mean, he was dealing a lot of injuries down the stretch there, but was not barely even a bottom pair defenseman skill or play style wise at that point, play wise. So yeah, you could definitely see the cliff coming, but that has also, to be fair and call myself out, I did start to buy into the hype a little bit because they were outperforming teams that at the time we were thinking were some of the best in the league. Obviously, Golden Knights missed the playoffs, but they beat the Golden Knights. They beat the Edmonton Oilers at home. They beat the Washington Capitals in overtime. So yeah, I began to believe in the hype, but when you looked at the team and you looked at the paper or the roster on paper and you just knew, you're like, okay, but when's the other shoe going to drop? And eventually it didn't just drop, it fell through the floor.
It was also like very much even going on a bigger scale than just the first 12 games of the season. Like, it really was a first half, second half thing in the sense of the defensive implosion that happened. Like, it really went from like we're competitive in every game in the first half, and we're around like a 500 team. Like, there was a point where Boston had 4 or 5 games in hand on us, but we were only like 3 or 5 points. Maybe it was closer to 6 or 7 points back from Boston. And everybody was like, oh, like, if Boston doesn't win very many of those games in hand, like maybe something can happen. And then the second half started, and post All-Star break was literally one of the worst like defensive performances from a team I've maybe ever seen in my life. And it was just consistent 6+ goals against the game. And like, that's not an exaggeration. Like, it was really, really bad. And so yeah, it was a very steep cliff and one that came very quickly. But I'm not sure. I think both can be true. I'm not sure everybody expected to like maintain where we were at in the first half, but I also don't think anyone expected the cliff to be as steep as it ended up being either.
Yeah.
Pilsy, get this. Stats guy Ross over here. The Detroit Red Wings allowed 7 or more goals 10 different times last season.
Yeah, and I would venture that like a majority of those were in the second half of the season. Yeah.
Yeah, only 2 were in 2021. So that's to
There
your
you go.
point there.
Yeah.
Wow. And twice double digits, and once was to the Leafs. That was an exciting game, though, if I
That
remember.
was the
that
craziest
was
hockey
wild.
game I've maybe ever seen in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say our experience with the Leafs might have been better. Down 5-1 with
That's
2 minutes
true.
left in the second period.
That's
it was
true.
5-1. And then we know how that one ended. Anything to get the Leafs. I mean, they got the better of you guys there. But before we move on, I do want to, you brought up Moritz Seider, and there's a lot of back and forth between Sens and Red Wings fans, right? There's so much that you can chirp about and get on, but then we all come together for the sake of Mannheim, our German sons. You guys have Moritz Seider. We got Tim Stützle,
Yes.
the two buddies. I think that'll bring us together here as the years go on. And boys, before we get back to chirping, World Cup of Hockey, Team Germany, how we feeling? We feeling good about that?
That's looking real good. I mean, those are two guys who are bona fide NHL, like not just all-star caliber players, but you could make the argument are going to be elite level talent in the NHL at such a young age already. I know Stützle had 53 points this season?
I think, right?
58 points. Thank you.
Yeah,
Off the top of my head.
35 in his last 35. Point per game player down the stretch.
Which was fantastic. And then obviously we all know what Moritz Seider did. He had over 50 points this past season. I think he was 11th among all defensemen in the league. 11th or 19th. I'm getting confused because there was just that recent NHL Network poll that put him at 11th among all defensemen. But I think it was 19th among all defensemen in points already as a rookie, which doesn't seem that impressive. But when you remember he's a rookie, is incredible. And this is a guy coming over from Europe who wasn't even touted for his offensive production. He was touted as a big defensive defenseman. And then he goes out there and is doing things on the offensive blue line with incredible patience, making NHL veterans look foolish. And then in the defensive end, going after Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
Like making a point to go after and intimidate Sidney Crosby. I mean, these two guys, you put them on the same team. Team Germany is not just for that team, but the future of the game for Germany. You see that on your television. You look and see how competitive Team Germany is going to be against, the Scandinavian powerhouses in Finland and Sweden. And then, of course, USA and Canada, anything can happen, although Canada, always a juggernaut. You are growing the game, and these guys are so incredibly good for the game. So absolutely, I mean, brothers in arms when it comes to talking about our German sons.
All right, yeah, we got to shout it. Obviously, our buddy over at Locked On Oilers, Brett Holden, they've got the King Daddy Topper of Team Germany there with Leon Draisaitl. And don't be surprised if JJ Peterka's in this conversation going forward. That's enough of that, though. Back to the Red Wings. I want to talk about how the Red Wings finished the season. Then we're going to get into the offseason additions for both teams. We're going to finish off discussing what the projection is like for next year, because there seems like there could be a wild card spot available, but we'll get into all that a little bit more. Was it a case, boys? I know we talked about the defense. We talked about how they just surrendered too much at the end of the day, but when it rains, it pours, because I'm looking here and there's a couple extremely long losing streaks here. How can a new coach coming in and a guy who's had success, I'm blanking on the name, you guys can help me out, but from Tampa, the assistant
Tampa's
coach.
assistant.
Derek Lalonde.
Derek
Yes.
Lalonde, thank you. First-time coach. Like, what is it that's first on his to-do list among Red Wings fans to straighten things out?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, we had a conversation kind of a little bit last week about this too. And I think one of the biggest things is special teams is like a huge thing for me personally. I know like that's just something that the penalty kill and the power play both have been so bad for years now that it's something that has to be addressed immediately. But I also think there are so many players in the last couple of years that I think a lot of people expected maybe more development out of. I mean, like Zadina just got extended. Like that's a big one, right? So like he's easily the most controversial player on this team and is just like free clicks and views whenever you say his name. But
that's why I made a short about him.
Right. But it's crazy because, he obviously hasn't lived up to the hype and expectation. So I think people are going to look at special teams. People are going to look at players like Zadina. But at the end of the day, I think people just really want a big step in the right direction with the win total. And this is a team and, you know, looking at the whole landscape of the entire city, an entire sports town that is just so desperate for any winner that I think people just want, even if it's not like postseason or anything right away. I think people just want like a significant step in the right direction at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with Scotty on most of those things. It's just when it rains, it pours is definitely a very true sentiment when you're talking about those long losing streaks. Obviously, the defense was a huge thing, but it was everyone. I mean, there were key injuries. Lucas, you find out that Dylan Larkin was injured after the All-Star break and eventually had a season shut down. His production took a dip. Lucas Raymond finally, you know, found his level, so he slowed down. But when it comes to talking about the Detroit Red Wings, I think the new voice in the locker room is going to have a huge effect because Jeff Blashill's message clearly got stale for the Detroit Red Wings in the locker room, and they all just needed a hard reset. We were talking about as soon as the season ended, we were like, before the season even ended, we were like, when do we fire this guy? Not that we didn't, you know, not trying to chase a guy out of town or anything, but it was just realistic. It needed to happen. And I think Derek Lalonde, everything he said, the focus on the special teams especially, is going to be huge. So I'm really excited to see what Derek Lalonde can do, but it's hard to tell what he will be able to do because he lacks that head coaching experience. But because of his pedigree, because of the fact that Steve Yzerman chose him, I'm really excited that this is going to be the guy for the Red Wings.
We'll get right back to our conversation with the fellas from Locked On Red Wings, but first, we got to let you know today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. More props, odds, and lines than ever before. Visit betonline.net for all the education you need heading into gambling season. Yes, preseason props are up at BetOnline. We've got team totals, player props, and everything else. And who is going to win the Stanley Cup? Always fun to sprinkle a little action across the board there. And then come playoffs, you're like, oh, I got them at plus 1,200 in the preseason. So head to betonline.net for all your news, stats, analysis, and podcasts throughout this season. It's betonline.net, where the game starts. All right, back to our conversation with Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley from Locked On Red Wings. All right, welcome back to the crossover between Locked On Senators, Locked On Red Wings. You can follow us all on Twitter. I believe it's LO_Red Wings, fellas.
Yes, sir.
On
Yes.
Twitter. Perfect. We're at Sens Central, the YouTube page. Super easy. Just type in Locked On, and they'll pop up right away. The fellas have been doing great work over there on Locked On Red Wings. You can also make another Locked On show your second listen of the day. We appreciate all the support heading in to what is season 4 of the Locked On's NHL channel. We're fired up about that. And we came on the Locked On NHL channel when Ottawa was in the same year as what you were talking about, where they had a head coach, but he just seemed like he was a lame duck. And at some point, it just wasn't going to work out. So Ottawa ultimately made the decision to can Guy Boucher. Mark Crawford is just like a filler for the end of the year. But then you get another new NHL coach, DJ Smith being a first-time guy. What do you guys have? I'm sure you've been asked about the Senators so much. What are some of the questions that you have when it comes to whether it's last year's Senators or how the optimism, like what's caused this level of optimism that we think we're going to be in the hunt for a playoff spot?
Well, not so much the playoff. I mean, there are a lot about the playoffs, but I do want to kind of circle back to you talking about Stützle. Him as well. The fact that Lucas Raymond,
Stützle or Raymond, answer
Yes.
it right now.
Yes, because
It's a great debate.
same draft class. This past year, they put up very similar numbers. I think just 1 point apart from one another. Obviously, Stützle finished very hot, but these two guys, we're talking. We know you like to joke about the brothers in arms between Seider and Stützle, but when you're talking about positional players playing near the same position, both wingers, and playing on, I did now. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know what line Stützle played on. But Lucas Raymond played top line minutes.
Yeah.
When you're comparing these two guys, what do you see in these two guys that's making you think, oh, Stützle's the better player or Raymond's the better player? Because Corey Pronman of The Athletic just put out his numbers, and Stützle is 8 and Raymond is 9. So,
Lafreniere's 10. We're brothers in arms. Brothers in arms, baby.
We'll ask Corey that. We're having Corey on tomorrow, so we'll have to ask him about that.
Definitely.
Pilsy, do you want to take this one? I will just say, though, and I'm sure Pilsy will build off it, Stützle made the change to center in the middle of last season. more so out of need when
Yes.
Michigan native Josh Norris went down with injury, and all of a sudden it just opened up everything for him.
Yeah, so he pretty much transitioned to a second line center when Norris came back. When they were both there, he was the second line center. And I think where you can see the similarities is both of their hockey IQ, and they're both just able to make dynamic plays. Like Tim Stützle, we always talk about it. Last season, his line mates were not the caliber of line mates you put with a guy who you draft third overall and who you're hoping is going to be a future part of your top six. Like he was playing with guys that were third line players, and the Sens just didn't have many better options. That's what it came
We
down
would
to.
always joke, and I'm sure you're the same way, where it's like we've got 3 third lines pretty much, but now we've got this future superstar who we like to refer that. Make sure you put the umlaut on superstar.
Yes,
But that actually reminds me, Nolan made a sick graphic for me when he signed and had that. But that's neither here nor there. Billsy, when you talk about line mates and upgrades, I think this is where the excitement comes in with Tim Stützle for next year.
Absolutely, yeah. The kind of consensus is the Sens are going to keep their top line the same. It's going to be Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, Drake Batherson. That trio was just incredible. The chemistry was amazing. They're all similar age groups. They're going to dominate together. So keep that together. Now, what pretty much everyone thinks is going to happen with the second line is you're going to have Tim Stützle at center, Alex DeBrincat as one of his wingers, 40-plus goal scorer. There's a nice
No
line.
big deal.
Yeah, there's a nice line made for you, Timmy. And throw in Claude Giroux, a savvy vet that can still get it done. And the big thing with Claude Giroux being on that line is he can help out Timmy with the faceoffs. As you guys know, young centermen in the league, they typically struggle with faceoffs. It takes time. So Claude can take the faceoff. Timmy can play center once the play gets going. And then you got a 40-plus goal scorer on your other flank there. So I think having Timmy be fully comfortable as a centerman for the better half of his second NHL season, having him, like Ross said, be a point per game guy at that position, and now upgrading his line mates to be proper caliber, he's poised for a breakout season. And I think this is really where we're going to see the Stützle-Raymond debate really flourish here. And maybe, Scott, I'll throw it to you. You can kind of compare this. How will Lucas Raymond's line mates change, or how will they stack up versus where Timmy's going to be at?
I mean, so presuming that he's staying at the top line because he didn't really do anything to deserve to get moved off of that. I mean, obviously he'll be playing with Larkin again, and Larkin had one of the best years of his entire career, if not the best year of his career this past season before the injury. And then on the other side, on the other wing, I guess Bertuzzi would probably be like the presumed, but like Bert got moved down to second line to kind of spread out the production a little bit at times last year, and they have made a ton of depth moves, so that might not be a permanent thing either way. But regardless, like if that is it, and Bert is at the top line, that's a grinder that's going to wreak havoc in front of the net, and that line was really productive when it was still intact. The only reason they moved Bert off of it was because they wanted any other line to score goals, right? So like they just felt like they had to. But so now with depth, maybe you can move Bert back up to the top line, and assuming Larkin continues doing what he did last year, he was nearly a point a game player for a majority of the season before the injury started nagging. And then Bert just being the kind of type of player that he is, I really think Raymond could be in a situation where that hot start he got off to could be something that he could more or less maintain. And I think that's the expectation more this season. Really, I mean, the biggest thing as well is the biggest thing this team addressed this offseason was defense, whether it was forward defense or like defenseman defense, like just all around. It was so unbelievably bad last year that that is something that A, we'll be looking for Raymond to take a step forward in as well. But B, I mean, like good defense leads to good offense, so just having, I don't know, not being down 3 goals halfway through the game
Or
every
7.
time you're going out on the ice has got to be worth a little bit, and having a little more faith in who's behind you for positioning and all that. Like there's a lot that I think he could take a really big step as well just in year 2. But I think the biggest thing, I don't know if Brian, you have anything to add, but I think the biggest thing is just trying to get him to maintain what he got off to last year rather than kind of a roller coaster, hot stretch, cold stretch type of season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, start of the season, he was just phenomenal. His hockey IQ was he was on fire at the start of the season, making all the right plays all over the ice. And as the season went on, as happens to rookies, the season started to catch up with him. The NHL started to catch up with him. And so offensively, I don't think he has much else to prove. I think, he's just going to get old, another year older, another year better if a sophomore slump doesn't catch him. But defensively is where I really want him to start to flourish. If you look at his advanced metrics, he wasn't a positive impact in the defensive zone by the end of the season. And that's just something that I'm not worried about. I think it's going to come with time, especially with a new regime that actually knows how to coach defense coming in. But that's I don't need to get into I don't need to get in the mud arguing about the defensive scheme that the last coaching regime had. But yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, well, our old coach used to call it the system, where it was just like a 1-3-1, and you just sat back. It was like watching paint dry.
I did that in
high
school, man.
Yeah, imagine neutering Erik Karlsson in his prime and being like, yeah, just tap it off the glass and out. Like,
I mean, it worked for a season, but then everybody's expecting it. It's like, okay, we know the system key.
Yeah. we just did. We called it the play not to lose, where we just all dump offs, just park the bus, and just don't really have any pressure at all.
Would you have guessed that if you play not to lose, you end up losing a lot of those games,
or you don't end up winning?
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, you mentioned something that I want to build off of there, and that's the defensive metrics. Timmy's are not good at all. But I think that's the case for a lot of Senators last year. It seemed to be like outside of Connor Brown, who it was moved more so in a budget move. I think you brought in Claude Giroux, and it was kind of funny because when they brought in Claude, and he's an Ottawa guy. He grew up here from, I think, the age of 8 onward, played junior here. Like he's just he's going to be an awesome ambassador, not only player, and he can still play 65 points last year. Like he's still a dynamic player and will really help Timmy. I want to say Giroux's like top 5 in faceoffs over the last decade. So
do you remember that video? Does anyone remember the video? I forgot who it was against, but it was like 6 or 7 years ago, maybe now. There was that video that went viral of somebody, I want to say it was someone on the Stars, got all up in Giroux's grill during a face-off.
Oh, yeah, Steve Ott.
Was it?
Wow.
And he's like, I'm gonna win this face-off. He's like, I'm top 5, whatever. And Claude just goes, okay. And then he wins the face-off. One of my favorite hockey clips ever, man.
Oh, dude, there's actually a good one of Giroux also mic'd up. I think it was like on the road to the Winter Classic, so they had them mic'd up quite a bit. But and he and James Van Riemsdyk are obviously buddies from their time with the Flyers. Yeah. But JVR's with the Leafs, and all you hear is Giroux go, "You pigeon," and then he goes, "Cuckoo!" And he starts making the noise at his face. Then another one where he's like, "Hey Phil, you have a Coke today yet?" And he's just having a good time. So he's obviously a good chirper as well. But Giroux is going to bring so much in terms of like stability to this group, because again, I think he's going to help improve all their defensive metrics just by being out there and being a guy who can, just go through the battles. He's been through the battles before, been to a Stanley Cup final, although probably the rest of the Sens were in elementary school. It's such a young team when he did back in 2010. But another thing, and I guess the final thing, and we can move off of this point, but it is a great conversation to have between Lucas Raymond and Tim Stützle is, and I asked Mark Mathot this last week, former Senator. I said, one, if you look at Alex DeBrincat's highlight reel last year, God, your first takeaway is Patrick Kane is so good. Like so many of the highlights, and he scored 41 goals. I'm not taking away anything from Alex DeBrincat, great finisher, and he did this in junior too. He put up ridiculous numbers, and everyone's like, yeah, well, his center's Connor McDavid. What do you expect? Then the next year, McDavid was gone, and he scored, I think, 61 and 65. Yeah. So he's good on his own. But you look at that highlight reel, and you're like, okay, Patrick Kane is ridiculous. That to say, now a player who I think has similar dynamic ability as Patrick Kane in Timmy, I'm wondering if in practice you can be like, hey, like when Kane sees this, he does this. I was wondering if that can kind of be taught. Mathot, who played 600 NHL games, told me I was being a bit of a fanboy with that statement, so I'll have to rely on him. But I could see it being like, hey, the X's and O's help. It can't hurt. He's obviously going to learn a bit more playing with those two guys rather than Alex Formenton, who had, I think, 5 NHL games before that, and Connor Brown, who's been stapled to a middle 6 role his whole career. So
I mean,
Anyway.
Ross, we at our core, we obviously try to be professionals and try to be as unbiased as possible. But at our core, we're fans. So I think being a little fanboyish at times is good. I was just thinking this the entire time we were talking. Like, don't tell our listeners this. I'll cut this out of our episode, Scotty. No, I'm kidding. We won't cut it out. I'm actually really excited for your guys' season because, and I know it stinks because we're directly competing with the Ottawa Senators. The Red Wings are not us, but the Red Wings are directly competing with the Ottawa Senators for hopefully a wild card spot. But you just look at the roster that's compiled on this team, the young talent that's compiled on this team, the savvy moves that Dorian has made this past offseason, and the fact that you guys finally rebranded your uniforms back to the 2D logo to have one of the cleanest uniforms in the league.
For real.
It's just so gorgeous. I mean, the Senators are one of the most exciting young upcoming teams in the NHL, and obviously I believe that about the Red Wings as well, but this is pumped. This has me pumped.
Ross is so excited he had to leave the room. Can't even contain himself.
He couldn't handle it.
I was like, you good?
You also never have to. You're never gonna get.
No, like imagine having this for
there it is.
decade.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
I was like, did Ross have to use the bathroom?
Are you kidding me?
Too bad you don't have a SNES jersey, Ross. That's even worse.
That one I just refuse to buy. That one
I was saying you guys never have to worry about Brian or I spewing like pro Patrick Kane propaganda. So like you can just say whatever you want about Patrick Kane, and that's fine. We're not going to be like, oh no, he's too good. No, you're fine, man. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. No, I mean the Red Wings obviously have one of the cleanest jerseys in the league. I eyed those in the background for so long, Brian, to make sure none was a Daniel Alfredsson jersey. I was going to make you take it down.
I will say though, so I was so pumped the day Alfredsson signed with the Red Wings because
you should have been.
Not me.
Well,
I had shepherd's pie and 4 shots of Jameson for lunch.
I don't know if you want to get into why he left. We all know why he left, but we don't have to go down that track. But Daniel Alfredsson he was obviously a Senators legend and arguably a hockey Hall of Famer.
Arguably.
He is a Hall of Famer.
No.
He is a Hall of Famer.
Listen, okay.
Hall of Famer.
If
we're not
arguing
arguing
a Hall
that.
of Famer, I will agree as long as Henrik Zetterberg's a Hall of Famer because that's
No, I mean if you go to Toronto, his photo's on the building. Like he's in the Hall of Fame.
Well, yeah, there now.
But my point being is like just the leadership he was going to bring to the Red Wings, and even at his age, I knew he was going to be so very good. And then he ended up leading the Red Wings in points that season because Henrik Zetterberg got injured that year.
Yeah.
So he became kind of the pseudo captain to the Red Wings and led them to the playoffs where they ultimately got bounced very early because that Red Wings team was not very good.
Yeah,
they
one
were
of my favorite stats
but
is
so happy to have him.
All of his playoff points are still with Ottawa.
Nice.
But I do actually bring that up. What you mentioned there, he is has to be one of the only players in NHL history. And sure, you can put an asterisk that the Sens were still kind of an expansion team when he made his debut. He led his team in scoring as a rookie and in his final year at 40 years old.
Wow.
That in itself is super impressive.
That's crazy. I remember Scotty and I, when he got inducted in the Hall of Fame, Scotty and I got into a heated debate. Not a heated debate. We were agreeing. But it's just, I don't want to get into the whole Hall of Fame thing because that's more of a Red Wings thing. But if Alfredsson is a Hall of Famer, and he deserves to be, and we agree on that. But if Alfredsson is, Henrik Zetterberg is, and the fact that Henrik Zetterberg is not in the Hall of Fame yet upsets me. And Alfredsson has the better point totals. He has the better games played. But when you come to accolades, man, Henrik Zetterberg's right up there with him. And it's just, I know we will get in eventually, but I'm just like, come on, man.
But he's older too. Alfie had to wait. I think Zetterberg, this was his first time eligible, right?
Correct.
Yep, it was. You're right.
He'll get in. Yeah.
I mean, you should honestly be more upset that the Sedins decided to have twins because there was no way one was getting in before the other, even though everyone knows that Henrik was better than Daniel.
Well, and now you're getting these stories coming out that they were switching jerseys during games. And
that story was crazy.
So whose points are really whose? It's just
oh man.
Hey, another uniting moment. Brian Murray needs to be in the Hall of Fame. I know he coached the Red Wings for a little bit, but he's a legend of the game too. And unfortunately didn't get his flowers while he was still living, but that's a guy. David Poyle, I tried to get him on the show I just went through the Hall of Fame, like who decides. And I was like, well, he gave this guy a start and he wouldn't come on the show. So you know what? We'll have to let that simmer down. But again, a guy who's very well deserved. I actually agree with you though. Zetterberg, he's got the cup. He's got the two-way acumen. There you go. I just don't mind him waiting his turn a little bit.
Yeah,
more.
That's fine. I know we'll get in eventually. I was being very. We talk about being fanboy. I was being very fanboy in that moment. Absolutely, I'll own up to it. I definitely want to ask you guys about the whole playoff thing before we
Yeah,
get this wrapped up
100%.
because
Our
that's the
division is
biggest
crazy,
argument.
man.
Yeah.
It's
Crazy
amazing.
division.
So why don't we build this off of the BetOnline totals
Beauty.
that came out? Because obviously our friends at BetOnline, we love them, betonline.ag, but they put those out. And I'm going to actually pull them up here. We tweeted them out at Sens Central today.
Perfect.
So they've got Toronto at 107.5, Florida at 105.5. My hammer lock of the century is they're getting under 105 points. I still think playoffs is probably more or less wrapped up for them just with their offensive talent. And who knows whether Spencer Knight's going to come in and become the dude this year. But if we look beyond that, like Boston at 95.5 points, then Ottawa at 86.5, Detroit at 84.5. Like the projection is right there. And sometimes you can be like, it's a projection, dude. Like, who cares? Like when they had Montreal at 78 in their projection last year over under, and they got 50 points all season. But with Ottawa, they set theirs at 73.5 last year, and they got 73. So sometimes they get close. Brian, start with you. What is your thoughts on the way that BetOnline has the Atlantic Division shaping up?
Honestly, it's a really tough tell. The fan in me wants me to be like, oh, Detroit will finish above Ottawa, but this is realistic. I could see this being how it pans out in the end, because both these teams have not just like on paper, but just talent-wise, depth-wise, have really acquired some great pieces this offseason. Obviously, Ottawa getting a 40-goal scorer in Alex DeBrincat and Claude Giroux being great. I mean, I think the biggest question mark with the Ottawa Senators still is their goaltending. You upgraded over Matt Murray, but Cam Talbot, how big of an upgrade is that for you guys? That remains to be the question. But offensively, you guys are going to be great. I wouldn't be surprised if you guys get the over, but I wouldn't expect it to be that much. I think those are pretty good numbers for Ottawa, but it's so tough. I mean, Detroit and Ottawa being within 2 points of each other on this is so realistic.
I know,
I could see the problem is with the Red Wings is this is such a radically different roster than what we saw last season. That on paper, new head coach, everything's brand new. It's not the same Red Wings team from last year. So on paper, you look at this team, you go, oh, this is a team that should be radically better, just so much better. But we don't know until the first game's played. I want to say they'll hit the over and they'll be better than Ottawa and finish what I think during our prediction, Scotty, I was saying if they finish 5th and competed for a wild card, that is a realistic goal to shoot for on the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, I think finishing below Ottawa is right there. But if they finish 7th or 8th in the division, I think that's a failure on this first season with Derek Lalonde. I think they want to be fighting for that 5th spot. Maybe everyone always talks about Boston Bruins too. I know we're not talking about the Boston Bruins, but everyone keeps talking about the Boston Bruins, and this is finally going to be the year they finally fall apart. But they just don't. I mean, Patrice Bergeron is an ageless wonder. The guy does not get worse or bad as he ages. So I do expect Boston to be right in there in the mix. But I mean, outside the top 3, I think it is going to be Boston, Ottawa, and Detroit fighting for that 4, 5, and 6 spot. And I could see a situation where both teams hit the over. But I could also see a situation where both teams maybe don't perform what we were expecting because, especially again with the Red Wings being a radically different team, maybe they don't perform or gel the way we thought they would on paper. You know what I mean? So I don't want to sit on the fence here, but I think the Red Wings can definitely hit the over. I think the Ottawa Senators can definitely hit the over. But it's just, they're good numbers. I don't think it's a guarantee one way or the other. I would say bet over on both of them, though.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say on the Bruins standpoint, I think the under is pretty clear for me based on the fact that McAvoy and Marchand are out for the first 3 months of the season.
Yep.
That's
a great
huge.
Point.
That's huge. Scotty,
Marchand especially.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I think one of my most confident unders is Montreal. I'm gonna be straight up with you.
Under the last place team, I love it.
I'm feeling really good about under 70 for Montreal. I'm for the Habs. I'm gonna be honest, but I mean, it is so just like on brand based on the comments that like Brian and I get on a weekly basis about like Ottawa, Detroit, and I'm sure you guys have similar experiences, and it's just it makes so much sense that they're right there and within 2 points of each other, and I think. There's a lot of both of our successes within the division are obviously going to be tied to how much of the under Boston ends up hitting with that 95, right? Like that's obviously that's massive. And when you're talking about if Ottawa hits the over, whatever, you get into the mid 80s, the high 80s, whatever. If unless Boston is below 90, like it's not even going to matter in the terms of being in the top half of the division, right? So I think that really is a huge part of both of our end of season like relevancy is just going to come down to where Boston's at. But it's, I mean, we spent the whole show comparing and contrasting. Like it really is such a fascinating conversation that I'm sure we could do another hour on. And I can't wait. Honestly, I can't wait for hockey period, but I can't wait to see. This is like some of the most excited I've been for an entire division. Really, maybe ever. Like I'm so pumped to see how it ends up shaping out. And despite what our fan base says, like I am actually rooting for Ottawa. Like I'm with it.
No, same, 100%. Likewise, I almost feel like we should do a monthly check-in with,
with
the fellas all season long. Maybe throw a couple Built Bars on the line here, get something.
Hey, there you go.
For it. Last thing I want to bring up, and we won't go too long with this, although I'm sure we all have our opinions. One of the biggest head-to-head, we talk about Stützle and Raymond. How about the two big dogs on the back end coming in this year? Jake Sanderson for Ottawa, Seaman Edvinsson in Detroit. Let's start with Edvinsson. Scotty, what kind of impact do you expect him to have right away?
Well, that's the big debate, right? So at this time last year, everybody, the big conversation was what's going to happen with Lucas Raymond. And everybody was like, is Raymond going to make the team out of camp? What's going to be the vibe? Like, does somebody have to get hurt for him to make it up? Is he going to start in the A and then be up really early? And this year, that is that copy-paste exact same conversation with Edvinsson. And there's certainly no guarantee either way right now. But, like, Raymond ended up not only making the team out of camp, but getting put on, like, first line and had a Hattie really early on in his career, like that.
My first episode.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. So that was clearly a very the correct decision, but a very impactful decision right away. And I think Edvinsson, man, like we all can't wait. Like he's such a unicorn in the same way that Seider is, with like the size and skating ability and speed and everything. Like he's going to be so much fun to watch. And I trust this front office like more than pretty much anything in my life. So if they want to start him down in the A and bring him up, a month or two into the season or whatnot, like I'll be fine with it. But I think that realistically, he could be by the midway point in the season, like the solidified second pair defenseman. And it could be that by game 40 for all we know, even if he doesn't start off the season on the NHL roster. I think that's a really feasible option and path. And I know everybody can't wait for him. So yeah, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really fun because this defense very much needs as much depth and help as it can get.
Pillsy, that sounds familiar, eh?
Yeah, it's almost identical to us, Scotty, because in Ottawa, still the weakest part is the defense core here. And like you guys have Seider as your anchor. In Ottawa, it's Thomas Chabot. The veterans they brought in have not worked. Similar to you, you guys understand that. It just hasn't worked. They need a top four defenseman. Jake Sanderson is coming in this season. But the thing with Jake Sanderson is he had a tumultuous year last year. He went to World Juniors. He went to the Olympics. He got injured multiple times. He re-injured his injury. It's been a crazy year. We're hoping he's going to be ready and good to go this season. But the question is, sure, you can put him in a top four role, but who is his partner going to be? Because a lot of people want his partner to be Artem Zub. Artem Zub is the type of defenseman. He makes all his partners better. But if you're putting Artem Zub with Jake Sanderson, that means Zub won't be playing with Chabot. And now your top pair is going to suffer because there's no one that can play at that level with Thomas Chabot. So the interesting thing will be to see is, can Sanderson find the right partner that can help him transition into the NHL? And how many minutes are they going to put on this guy? Like, Sanderson is used to being the top dog for all the teams he plays for, playing 20 to 25 minutes. You can't just jump into the NHL as a young defenseman and play those big minutes. But the Senators don't have a lot of other options. So it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of role they give him and how he's going to be able to hold up in the first couple games here.
Yeah, only played 23 games last year in college, and he got sliced he was like diving. This is just the way he plays, like full out every single second he's on the ice. He dove to the far post to try to stop a wraparound while his goalie was far the other way, and a guy came in and accidentally stepped on his hand, so sliced his hand right open.
Ugh.
And then as he tried to come back, gripping the stick, reopened it, had to get surgery. So he had surgery twice on this same hand. But in those 23 games he played last year at college and NCHC, one of the toughest conferences with the University of North Dakota, 26 points as a defenseman. So able to generate offense. Everyone knows how great of a skater he is, but that part of his game, Ottawa needs so badly. So it's going to be really interesting there. Like, who do you expect Edvinsson to play with next season?
I mean, that's the constant debate. So I think everyone's dream is for him to end up playing top pair minutes with Moritz Seider down the line, one on the right side, one on the left side, because they're both
not
giant
next
guys.
Year, though.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's just a dream because Moritz Seider himself is still very inexperienced in his own right. I mean, I think because of the style that Edvinsson plays, he's much more defensive. You're not going to get the offensive upside you get with Moritz Seider and Simon Edvinsson, but he's very smart defensively. I mean, I think you want to put him with a guy who's got some experience in the NHL, but also complements his play style. And we talk about Phil Peronic as a guy you could possibly pair with him. Now, Phil Peronic kind of had a bad season last year. No way of, putting it kindly. He just did not play up to his potential. But he's a little bit more of an offensive style defenseman, and those two play styles could complement each other very nicely. And if it's not Hronik and Edvinsson together, you put Olli Maatta out there because Olli Maatta, I think, granted, though, being a left-handed defenseman, you don't really want two lefties on the same line, but Olli Maatta is very safe. So if you want to put him with somebody who will allow Edvinsson to make mistakes and cover up his mistakes, Olli Maatta would be a great guy as well. So it's really depending on what you want out of Edvinsson in year one. Do you want him to provide support for a guy like Hronik who wants to score goals, or you want to watch him and make sure he's being tutored and playing, honing his game as a defensive style defenseman by putting him up with a guy who will protect him and guide him as well. So I think those are two very possible options. But, we talked too about Ben Sherrod as well. Ben Sherrod would be another guy, a guy that just signed out of Florida. And
we saw a lot of him.
Contract. Loving that contract.
We saw a lot of him in the Canadian division last year when he was playing in Montreal.
Mm-hmm. So it could be really any three. I'd want to put him with somebody with a little bit more experience. So I think more than likely end up with a Philip Hronik or a Ben Sherrod. But it's going to be really tough because I think coming in, Simon Edvinsson has the potential to be immediately your second best defenseman on the team. And how are you going to put him with a guy who's going to make him, better when he's already better than everyone except for Moritz Seider?
Fair. I just found it. Fellas, from December 17th to December 31st, the Sens and Red Wings play 3 times.
Here we
In
go.
the span of 2 weeks. 3 times in the span of 2 weeks, but we got to do this beforehand. We got to check in maybe at the end of November. Get the boys maybe 20 games under their belt.
Beauty.
So some of your listeners are probably looking at the first 20 games. If they saw what Ottawa's done the last 2 years, 4 wins in their first 20 games each of the last 2 seasons, all but taking them out of playoff contention. So we'll touch base at the 20-game mark, but before we wrap up this episode, we need some official predictions. In or out? Are the Detroit Red Wings going to make the playoffs, or the Ottawa Senators going to make the playoffs? Brian, lead us off.
Oh, no. Oh, this is a tough one. So you're asking if one or the other, or both will be in or out?
Each. Answer one and then the other.
Man, this is a tough one. I'm struggling very hard with my own biases, but if I'm being completely honest, I don't think the Red Wings are going to make the playoffs this year, because if they're going to compete for a playoff spot, they're going to be competing not only with the Atlantic Division, but the Metropolitan Division for one of those 2 wild card positions. And I think with the Senators, with the Bruins, with the Blue Jackets, all those teams are going to be highly competitive for those wild card spots. I don't see the Red Wings making it. I could see, however, the Senators making the playoffs, but there's still big question marks, obviously, with your guy, like you guys said, defense, goaltending, but the amount of offensive production you're going to get out of the guys you brought in and the steps forward you're going to take, I could see the Senators snagging one of those 2 wild card spots, but it's going to be a really tough race down the stretch.
Billsy?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to hold my biases in, but I've got
hard.
Ottawa just barely making the playoffs. I think they're going to snag that last wild card spot. Yes, there's issues on the defensive end, but you got two solid veteran goalies who I think are going to be a great tandem in the regular season, and I think Ottawa's going to outscore a lot of their problems. Those additions that came in are really going to boost the goal scoring. They're going to have two competent power play units. Like, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with offensively, and I think that's going to give them the edge, and that's going to help them make the playoffs. I think Detroit is going to be right where you guys talked about. They're going to be fighting for a wild card spot. They're going to be playing in meaningful games later on, but I don't think they quite have enough to boost or kick one of those teams out of a spot. That's where I'll go here.
Scotty?
I think I'm gonna go with a unique answer too. Then I think I'll take no on both, and I think I'll put it in the terms of it would not surprise me if neither of these teams make the playoffs that you're talking about like two of the best teams in hockey to miss the postseason. Like, you're talking about like seeds 17 and 18, right? Like, I think that that's very feasible, and I think that. Like, I hate just saying like, oh, next year, because we've been here, like, both of our fan bases and franchises, I've like heard that for so long now, but I really think that like next year for at least the Wings for sure is like the year that I think everybody expects the huge step of like, hey, you're supposed to go deep into the postseason at this
you're
point,
not
or at
just
least make the postseason at this point. So I think I'll go with no for both, but I think you're going to be talking about two of the youngest teams in hockey that just barely missed the postseason and are really excited about the following year.
Nice. Yeah, I probably lean towards no on both. I think that Ottawa's probably a year ahead of Detroit. And I was gonna say, because Ottawa had the early pick 1 year earlier. That wasn't the case. It's just Philip Zadina still hasn't broken out, whereas the guy who went 2 picks earlier is the captain of the Ottawa Senators, 30 goal scorer now in Brady Tkachuk. Yeah, leading the team in points. I think the last 2 years Brady's led them in points, and it's just wild to think he's going into his 5th NHL season right now. A guy who just like got drafted, and he's just that pro guy. So I think that Ottawa's probably a year ahead in that standpoint. But man, I love what Detroit's done in terms of really setting themselves up for the future. Obviously, I'm based in Winnipeg, gotten to see a bit of Andrew Kopp the last year. I think he's kind of that stabilizing force, a guy who can play all 3 forward positions. And I love what they've done. Like you said, the Sherrod contract probably, take a mulligan on that. But at the same time, this is kind of like Ottawa got roasted for going out and trading a 3rd round pick for Travis Hamonic. And say what you want about Hamonic, bottom pair guy at this stage in his career. But the reason Dorion did that, he said, with 1 year left on his deal beyond the trade deadline when they acquired him last year, he didn't like what was on the free agent market. So he said, why don't I just get my guy now and get him acclimated? He played 19 games, actually played a lot better than people would have given him credit for. So I think that was kind of where Stevie Y kind of got caught with his cards open. And he's like, well, now I need a defenseman. Did he have to give the term? No, but Sherrod, I mean,
that's free agency,
some teams
right?
think he's good, right? And some teams think he's good. Florida gave up a 1st round pick to get him. So,
and that's the thing we talk about all the time with Ben Sherrod too. And I know we got to wrap things up. I'll keep it real short. But, teams in the NHL value him. They clearly do.
Yeah.
And so clearly all of us are wondering what it is. But, if Steve Yzerman is willing to pay this guy this much money to be a Red Wing, he's done enough and has enough carte blanche cachet to give him the benefit of the doubt. He still deserves the benefit of the doubt because he hasn't done anything up until this point to prove he doesn't deserve it.
Right. I guess the counterpoint to that is Eric Branson got $16 million this summer as well. And he's a stud. He's just not a stud on the ice. He's just a good-looking dude, good Ottawa boy. No. But all that to say, I think it's going to be an awesome year between these two teams. I love that it's 3 games in 2 weeks. Like that's money, because they had the 2 games in 2 weeks or in a week last season.
Yeah.
But 3.
And that was fun for us.
That was very fun for us. And
I'd
we
imagine.
mentioned Alex DeBrincat, another Michigan boy. So there's some connections. Ottawa's got Austin Watson, Josh Norris, and Alex DeBrincat, three good Michigan boys. So fired up. And if you count the U.S. program that's based in Michigan, pretty much the rest of the team. Ottawa loves going to the U.S. program. But Scotty, Brian, Pilsy, love the conversation. This was great. And let's circle doing this at the end of October, end of November, around that stage of the season. and we'll see how either bad or on track our predictions are. Brian, we'll
Beauty.
start with you. Any final words?
Go Red Wings.
All right. Scotty?
We ball, baby. Yes, sir.
Felzy?
I'll throw a Go Sens Go in the chat here. That's how we're ending things off.
All right, everyone, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Locked On Red Wings, Locked On Senators, on Twitter, LO_Red Wings, and Sens Central. Have a great day, everyone, and enjoy what will be a wild ride in the Atlantic Division.